And joining us now is Lieutenant General Mike Groen, who served as the director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center at the Pentagon before that went through a little bit of a restructure and a renaming. But Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks, Suzanne. It's always a pleasure to be here. Great to talk to you, and it's still a very exciting topic. I mean, we've been talking about this for a few years running now, but honestly, you look at where we are. I mean, we're just still at the beginning stages of this, so it's really important that we continue to talk about it.
Really happy to talk to you about sort of, I think I had mentioned in a previous conversation with you, Mike, that the Cipher Brief spoke recently with Norm Rule from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he told us in an interview there that AI is absolutely going to be just as fundamental and seismic, I think might have been the word he used, as the discovery of oil. And I think that's a really big, important statement, not only in terms of how broad AI is going to change the world, but I'd like to get your thoughts on that, but also then about how the Pentagon needs to be maybe reacting quicker to the implementation of AI. So that's a whole lot to kind of throw out there at once. But let's talk about the big picture for just a minute in artificial intelligence. You spent a lot of your time focused on this when you were in the military. You've been out of the military for a little bit of time now, really engaging with the private sector. Give us sort of your impression of the impact of AI and how quickly we all, private sector, government, whatever, need to understand the implications of this.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's a great story, but once again, it kind of depends on where you poke the elephant and you get a different different sensation, right? So like the idea that we are at I think a transformational point within this broad transformation, and what I mean by that is we are moving past, I'll say, a fascination with large language models. And, it's almost more social media than tech media when we talk about the personalities, the wealth being generated, corporations making money. Oh my God. Like that, like we've really, this has become a soap opera in much of the media space. And I think it's appropriate. And I think we are moving in the right direction here. I think things are actually broadly on track. And that is, let's start talking about the broad implementation focus. Like let's now, start talking about where, how can we start to do things at scale? And this is especially relevant in the Department of Defense and other large organizations. I saw a commercial the other day. I think it was on, a web thing, and the conversation was, hey, we're this company, and isn't it about time that AI actually starts to do something useful? And I want to first applaud, say, yes, you are exactly in the right space, and then I also want to kind of rub my chin and say well, AI is doing stuff all over the place. It's just that it is an implementation. Broad implementation across industries that you don't necessarily see. And so, I think a lot of Americans are still kind of fixated on the large scale, large language models, and really starting to, and ignoring for now, the broad application that really is going to start to influence us through agency, across almost everything that we do.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to national security, there's this added, anxiety, if you will, that the adversaries, particularly China, is really advancing in the AI space. And, China, just because of the way it's structured, it is not an open democracy. They are able to take information from private corporations. They're able to control their military and build their military in very different ways, just structurally. How worried are you about the U.S.'s ability to remain competitive when it comes to understanding how important it is to implement, as you said? I think there are a lot of very smart folks in government who understand 100% what AI is and what it can do. But as you mentioned, the implementation piece is really critical.
Yeah. And Suzanne, I have to start with the vitamin I deficiency, right? Famously, right? We have a vitamin I deficiency. I being imagination, right? We can't imagine right now, what the scaled enterprise is for our military capabilities, for our intelligence capabilities. Like building those scaled enterprises requires a vision, and that vision has to come from imagination. And so when you can see it, when your workforce can see it, when your customers can see it, like, I'm going to get this product delivered to me in this way, and that's exactly what I want, or I can tweak it if it's not. When you get to that place, now we're really starting to launch implementation at scale. And I see, lots of conversation about AI today, and lots of, I think, almost like substituting for that by, digging into niche issues that, in the big scheme of things are probably not all that important, when we should be actually implementing and practicing our large scale data environments, for example. This is going, that project alone is going to take a long, long time to get that data mesh environment, alive and ready for applicability across, all of our military use cases. So, like, how do we get started there? Where's our gym, that we can go to actually start doing this at scale? Because I think we will have lots of bad behaviors and lots of tribalism on the front end that we need to learn to overcome. And so, like, that cultural stuff, honestly, I'm not concerned about the technical stuff. We've got plenty of smart people that can do that. But, like, how do we move the culture of Department of Defense and the IC into something that's integrative rather than tribal? And this is, many have tried. Many have tilted at this windmill. We have to do it again, though, because this is the difference between success and failure, specifically with reference to China. And we can talk more about that if you like.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I'd also love to follow up on the vitamin I deficiency quote, because I think it's important to imagine what the military or whatever it is, your business or whatever, needs to look like 5 years from now. I very much believe in, laying out the steps and the path to get there based on where you think you need to be. If someone were to ask you 5 years from now, where does the U.S. military need to be? And then maybe ask you the first step. And I think you almost sort of answered this when you talked about changing the culture, but the first step to get there, kind of walk me through, what great looks like when it comes to AI's use in the military.
Yeah, it sounds, it sounds very foreboding, right? Like, oh my God, we have this massive project to do, and we do. But AI can start really small, right? In the first place, I mean, there's a cultural shift. It's really the same in in society too. There's still, the conversation about, like, hey, did you hear AI did this or AI did that? And I think, that is kind of that is shorthand for, or that is I think a mistaken reference to humans have used AI to do this. Humans have used AI to solve this problem. Humans have used AI now to, identify objects in imagery and, do assessments from geo, and every other int, but like all of these things are happening now, but still, like, society writ large, at least American society, still thinks of this through the lens of, oh, this scary thing called AI, it has its own will, it's doing its own thing. And that was a useful conversation when we were all sort of like getting used to this, but we're way past that. We have to be past that. Now let's talk about the practicalities of a data environment and things like, is the Air Force going to let the Marine Corps use this data, for this algorithm? And, all the complexities of that data mesh environment and how we actually make that go. The only way to make progress here is getting reps and sets, doing it, this exercise, this application, out in CENTCOM, this application here and there. Like, when we actually employ this, even for demonstration purposes, but we do it, I think we move the ball forward. And if you're familiar with GUIDE, and probably a lot of your listeners are, this is the Global Information Dominance Exercise or experiments. And we started that back in the JAIC years ago. But what that was a demonstration capability where the department would go out to a combatant command and actually identify problems to be solved, and then actually code it and build an infrastructure for that. Just so like example after example after example, so that pretty soon you actually start to think systemically because you have so many examples, right? And that energy of like real application is so important. We cannot fixate on policy and technology and culture. We have to fixate on problem solving and application.
And information sharing, I think you had mentioned, is a huge part of that. And I think it's difficult for people who haven't served inside the military and don't understand the way the military is structured internally as well as you do. Really struggle to understand the information sharing challenge that exists there. Can you, and without going too deep into it, can you just kind of give us a sense of how that works and why that's such a critical component to having AI be an effective part of the U.S. military strategy?
Yeah, it begins with the tribalism inherent in the Department of Defense. When they built the Pentagon, they knew there was going to be a space force in the 1950s. So they built the Pentagon with five sides, which means there are five corners. So each service has a corner that they can back into and protect their data and their money from the other services. And I joke, but like that culture, that very tribal culture, which is derived from our origins of buying things, tanks, airplanes, ships, whatever. Now we're not buying things. We're buying integration, and we're using the data that we've collected as services, as warfighting organizations. And so this cultural change. It's not that we don't know tech. There are plenty of people in the Department of Defense that know tech. The problem is, I think a lot of folks think that, well, we'll just call 1-800 Silicon Valley and they'll come and they'll just code all this up and it'll be fine, just like we do when we buy a system. But that's not how it works, because this is so deeply inherent into how do you do command and control? How do you do fires? How do you do aviation? Like, this is deeply like military expertise combined with the technological expertise. Neither one alone can do this. And we have, I wouldn't say turned our back, that's too strong, but we have kind of disincentivized like focus on real military application here so that we can get better and better at it. And that I think should be a little bit disturbing to all of us. We need practical application now so that we can imagine what practical application could look like when we're doing it at scale.
Yeah. Let's go back to China. Talk to me a little bit about your primary concerns regarding China and the way that they are both developing and implementing this technology that's so critical.
Yeah. So great. Thanks for dragging me back on target here. But China, here's the thing with AI in China. I mean, Chinese universities are cranking out, AI expertise and writing papers and doing all the science. I mean, they do not lack for, the ability to understand the technology. But what always strikes me is, AI is an information technology, right? Like it's enabled by the flow of information across industries that maybe are not even related, but the data is relevant. Information flow in a closed information society is inherently impaired, right? Like you cannot operate with the flexibility and the imagineering, right? The innovation. You can't do that at speed if you always have to look over your shoulder to see if the party guy agrees with what you're doing. And so like this is so I think even with all the great science and the great technology that's going on in China, there is like real cultural inhibitions to applying this well. And I think you can see this in, for example, like the joint swords exercises, the rehearsals for the seizure of Taiwan. These because the Chinese military is not as imaginative and they're very rote in their actions, they have to rehearse over and over and over again. Like if you can't think your way through it while you're executing it, then you have to rehearse the rote methodology over and over again. And this is what we see, right? They're pushing landing craft into the south or into the Taiwan Straits. They're doing these large scale exercises. They're flying airplanes, over the same routes that they would fly if they were going to try to seize Taiwan. So like they they have the tools, the technological tools at their disposal, but they're kind of where they are, the maturity of their military capabilities, like command and control, and how do you do integrated fires, and how do you do long scale movements, or tactical resupply, like those kind of things, really important things that American military folks just inherently learn that as and how to be innovative in that space. They don't have that. I would give us a voice of caution though. We spend a lot of time thinking about, they don't have a 7 nanometer chip, or, they don't have, they're not pursuing 2 nanometer technology. Look, Huawei is dominating global telecommunications, and they don't need 7 nanometer chips to do that. They can do just fine with 27 nanometer chips or 52 nanometer chips, right? So like, we have to be very careful to be overconfident to say, well, their technology is not quite as fast as ours. Technology, as long as it's fast enough to get the job done, then it doesn't matter. And so, like, I think we Americans can be, especially in the intel space and the defense space, we can become overconfident that, hey, well, they're not as good as us. They might be good enough. And that's what we should really pay attention to.
I want to ask you something that I feel like is really critical moving forward, and that is the public-private sector relationship when it comes to this. Now, when you were still in the Pentagon, I know that you understand and leveraged those private sector relationships. What do you think now that you've been outside as well? Do you see the landscape there differently?
Yes, I do. I mean, many of the same cultural challenges still apply, and the last thing I want to do is kind of go down the rabbit hole of defense acquisition. That ground has been covered over and over and over again. Yet we are not willing to make the cultural changes necessary for us to do that. And maybe I'll just leave it at that. But that's one artifact. We could fix that overnight if we had the political will to do it. But that is what I go back to once again is, there's not. Our young soldiers and sailors and airmen and guardians all have to, and Marines, don't forget, all have to really see this in their heads. Like, what does their warfighting function? I mean, I am blown away by, when I was in uniform, just like the expertise of functional communities. If you wanted to talk to, like, how does aviation really work? You could find somebody who could talk to you for days about like how the nuances of the profession of aviation. And same thing, the profession of logistics, or the profession of, artillery fighters. Like, all of these things, like, we're deeply steeped in that. And so, like, that we have to, like, that kind of nuance is what makes AI successful then in a dirty, dangerous, chaotic environment. Even with all the data you can handle, you're still going to have chaos, and command and control is going to be extraordinarily difficult in a fight that with this kind of tempo that's enabled by AI. So, like, these cultural things are so they're so important, yet I don't know, the institutions kind of discount those. Well, that's just people stuff and we'll figure it out. Yeah, we will. But better that we figure it out now than, some young sailors have to figure it out while there's a Chinese missile inbound to their ship, right? Like, it is that important that we get this technological transformation underway.
Yeah. I want to ask you, with a new administration coming in, and this will be my final question, so please feel free to add on anything additional as well. But with a new administration coming in, new leadership at the Pentagon, there's always a lot of apprehension and anxiety during this phase. Mike, what's your incoming advice for the incoming Secretary of Defense? What could he do immediately that you think would set the U.S. and the U.S. military on the right path when it comes to AI?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and obviously I remain an apolitical individual. I retired a few years ago, but I believe in the mission, and I believe in the young men and women who are doing that mission on our behalf. And I believe that they deserve the best leadership and capabilities that we can give them as a nation. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I do resist pretty heavily, this idea of politicization, especially among general officers. Just to, I know a few of them. They're actually really good people. And and here's the thing, I wore that as a badge of honor when I was wearing a uniform, is I was apolitical, right? I served the American people. I did that apolitically. I did that in ways that we could build capability, that we could take care of young warriors. And in my 36 plus years, I don't think I ever met a flag officer or general officer who didn't think exactly the same way. We are keepers of a nation here. We are keepers of young women and men who actually, constitute, the nation and are willing to, raise their right hand and move into harm's way. My God, what a responsibility for us as leaders. And like I said, every military leader that I've encountered, certainly at a general officer level or flag officer, has felt exactly the same way and feels that way today. I have conversations like this, over the last several weeks now, about this idea of political loyalty tests. I raised my right hand and swore, fealty to the Constitution of the United States, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's enough, right? I don't need anything more than that. And I don't think by scratching at, the surface of those statements, we will come up with anything more useful than what we have today. I just think it's a fool's errand. But that's that's politics, and that's part of the system too. So we all have to kind of learn to abide by that. I think broadly, for other the Secretary of State, for example, and others, here's this is obvious to me. I do a lot of geopolitical risk consulting, globally, and there's a couple of themes that are they're irrefutable. And the first one is the decline of the idea of the West. What are the people that we call our greatest generation built the West, and now we are at risk of the West starting to fray and starting to become weakened. And it's not just because of our actions; it's because purposefully the Russians and the Chinese and others are trying to bend the will or bend the impressions of the global South to push back against this idea of the West, the idea of, why should they force you to do democracies like that? Or why should we all be using the dollar as kind of the global currency? These things are enormously important to us. I just don't know that all of the folks that are nominated for these offices really have an understanding of the gravitas of the Western system, the importance of our allies, and then the importance of helping to shape the global South. All of those countries that China is lobbying like crazy, saying, "Hey, look at those Americans. They're screwing this one up too. They don't even know how to do an election. But blah blah blah. The little currents. We owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our nation to kind of get our information stuff together here. And I just don't see any real impulses to do that. I always talk about Schoolhouse Rock. You've probably heard me talk about it, right? Like simple messages that help people understand what it means to be an American, what it means to be a democracy, what it means to help shepherd other countries into new places. Because the other thing I would say to a new Secretary of State, watch demographics, right? The global demographic rates in the modern world are plummeting, and the global demographics in Africa, South America, and other places, Southeast Asia, are exploding. And so that means a lot. That means economic transformation. It means political transformation. It means military power transformation. If we're not paying attention to demographics, then we're kind of missing the boat.
And very good points indeed. Lieutenant General Mike Groen, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to talk with us here at the Cipher Brief. It's always a pleasure, and I'm sure we're going to be having a lot more conversations about this topic in the years to come. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Suzanne. Always great to talk to you, and Brad too. I mean, you guys do great work, and it's so fun to be a part of the Cipher Brief. What a great team you've got.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.